The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée générale,
President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As you enter this building, what catches the eye is a bluish light. This is the peace window. At the heart of the United Nations, this stained glass window is committed to those who work for the benefit of the United Nations. It was made by Marc Chagall, a Russian Jew who lived for the most part of his life in exile. He lived through 2 world wars. To guarantee peace and security, which were re-established in 1945, the promises of freedom and solidarity were engraved in the United Nations Charter. This is the 10th consecutive time I have the honor of delivering a statement from this rostrum. In 2015, I listed the challenges of our generation: conflicts, poverty, the climate, and migration. None of these challenges has been solved. And yet, at the time, we thought that we had a robust framework, the multilateral order, which would allow us to work together to tackle these challenges. A decade has gone by, and this framework is shattering before our very eyes. The use of force, growing numbers of unilateral acts, and what we're witnessing, often without any hope, is 3 major conflicts, which together are brewed into an explosive cocktail. In Ukraine, a permanent member of the Security Council has launched an illegal, unprovoked war. It is a flagrant attempt to impose the law using force instead of drawing on the force of the law. This war is a direct threat to the people of Ukraine and to each and every one of us. The European Union supports Ukraine and will continue to support Ukraine for as long as is necessary. We will live up to our promise of freedom and solidarity, recommitting ourselves to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace enshrined in the UN Charter. Freedom and solidarity. Drawing on these very principles, we'd like to condemn the terrorist attacks, vile terrorist attacks committed by Hamas. We call for the release of all hostages, and unconditionally so. Israel has the right to defend itself with due respect for international law and the principle of proportionality. We want an immediate ceasefire in keeping with the advisory opinion of the ICJ. The life of every civilian counts, and we condemn all indiscriminate attacks targeting civilian populations. The EU is taking action and wants to do more to achieve lasting peace within the framework of a 2-state solution. The endless escalation must end. And let me tell you, drawing Lebanon into this spiral is irresponsible, absolutely irresponsible. These calls, including calls addressed to the government of Israel, have to date borne no fruit. This cannot go on. We want a democratic, a strong state of Israel, living in peace and security side by side with the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people, which should have their own stable and viable state. The Palestinian people deserve respect and dignity. I say this to the government of Israel. Trying to achieve security without peace is impossible. Without peace, there cannot be lasting security. A world that is driven by revenge is a world that is less safe. The Palestinian people have the right to their own state. This will continue to result in Israeli security and the security of all Jews being undermined unless such a state is established. This will result in polarization and the undermining of the international system, which cannot be underpinned by double standards. Ladies and gentlemen, the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine are resulting in terrible consequences, and women are paying the worst price for this, including in the civil war of Sudan. Over 20,000 people have died, 20 million people are facing an emergency, 8 million have been displaced. Across the Horn of Africa, the situation is turning into chaos. We must put an end to external actors feeding these wars. We must put an end to arms supplies. It is time to take action and to implement peace and reconciliation processes. Ladies and gentlemen, the life of a child killed in a school that was bombed is valuable. In Ukraine, in Gaza, everywhere. The dignity of a woman who's been raped, her besmirched dignity, is sacred in times of war and peace in Sudan, in Ukraine, elsewhere. Depriving an entire people of food is a crime of war in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan, and elsewhere. A crime is a crime, regardless of who the perpetrators are or where the crime is committed. And our indignation can only be genuine if it is universal. The European Union defends international law equally across the board, everywhere. We condemn all acts geared towards destabilization, regardless of who the perpetrators are. Here I'm referring to Iran, which is using proxies to feed and conflicts in the Middle East. It's thanks to Iran's military support and Russia's war in Ukraine that this is happening. We must take stock of the situation. Iran and Russia are using the very same playbook. Their nuclear threat, imperialist ambitions, support for terrorist groups, godless and lawless terrorist groups, and all of this is destabilizing neighboring countries and the rest of the world. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the establishment of the United Nations and the international system underpinned by rules was a remarkable step forward. Going backwards means going back to a time of war. More than ever since 1945, our world is being hard hit by an explosive conflict, an explosive cocktail of shocks. They're piling up, they're speeding up. We must get our bearings. This requires cooperation and courage. We need common laws which are respected by all. To this end, the Security Council must throw off the yoke of the veto which paralyzes it. The Security Council isn't representative nor legitimate. It's ineffective. The Security Council is increasingly stillborn, like a zombie. In June 1945, when the UN Charter was adopted, President Truman said that this charter will be expanded and improved over time. It will require adjustments. Decades have gone by. No readjustments were made. And yet we must reform the Security Council. It must become more inclusive. Africa and, the way I see it, Latin America should have permanent seats. Furthermore, regional organizations must be incorporated further into UN decision-making. Furthermore, they should have an advisory role to play in the Security Council, regional organizations, that is. Ladies and gentlemen, there cannot be any freedom when drought eats away at crops. We cannot have freedom when there are terrible hurricanes tearing down houses, when there are pandemics and some do not have access to medicines or vaccines. We must open our eyes and live up to the solidarity that's required of us. It's not just about dignity, morals, or solidarity. It's in the interests of developed countries to support the green transition as well as development, helping developing countries to buttress their health systems. And it is in that spirit that Dr. Tedros put forward the idea of an international treaty on pandemics. We've made a great deal of headway on these negotiations, but it's now time to finalize the agreement. Mpox has set alarm bells off once again. However, it's unacceptable for lobbies and egotistical behavior to block the road to sharing of vaccines and vaccine technologies. Distinguished colleagues, there cannot be freedom in a world when each individual can be boiled down to his or her data. to a commercial target that can be surveilled and manipulated. The digital revolution is, of course, a driver, an extraordinary driver of progress, specifically artificial intelligence. It's a new driver of prosperity. However, it must be harnessed for the benefit of humanity and freedom. We shouldn't commit the error, unless we've already committed it, of misusing natural resources and misusing personal data like we did with natural resources. Data and artificial intelligence are instruments of power. They are instruments of subjugation and economic and political domination. They can become weapons of war. We must create a framework so that we can move ahead at a global level. Technological competition is healthy. It promotes progress, but it must be something that occurs within a framework which we all agree to, rules of the game and fair competition. We need a global dialogue within the G7, but also together with the rest of the world, Africa, Latin America, Asia. We are going to work with them. We're also going to work with those whose ideas and sometimes whose behaviors we do not agree with. China is a key partner to help us tackle global challenges, which I mentioned earlier, to reduce risks, to diversify our supply chains. Because as we know, excessive dependence on a given supplier gives rise to vulnerability and thus conflict. We should also ask China to not support to not support Russia, neither directly nor indirectly, in its illegal war against Ukraine. Instead, China should use its influence to ensure respect for the United Nations Charter. Ladies and gentlemen, the international financial architecture should help us to reduce inequality, not to exacerbate it. When a Kenyan farmer cannot access microloans at acceptable rates, it's not just something unfortunate, it's a challenge to the entire global development order. Because without lasting and equitable development, we cannot have global stability and security. We must change the system. Financial firepower must be multiplied for the benefit of our people to ensure that we can address the climate threat and achieve prosperity. The most courageous donors should restructure debt and allocate additional special drawing rights. It's not just about the transfer of financial or technological means. Solidarity also requires us to reform governance, to improve business climates, strengthen legal certainty, combat corruption, and mobilize resources within developing countries as well. As Mo Ibrahim said, very frankly, while economic aid and relief efforts for Africa are wonderful and commendable acts of solidarity, we also need to change the way our countries are run. Ladies and gentlemen, by way of conclusion, I'd like to end this 10th and last speech from this rostrum with a few personal remarks. My first point, double standards are a modern-day poison in international relations. When we defend human dignity, territorial sovereignty, honest, free, and transparent elections, we should defend and protect them across the board under all circumstances. And each and one of us must humbly look in the mirror. We have all inherited our own cultures, our own histories, traditions, and probably our various errors. Everyone must draw conclusions. Humbly, we must do our best to be better. Europe often acts awkwardly, but it does so genuinely in good faith to ensure that human rights and freedoms are protected across the board. This brings me to my second point. We must steadfastly reject bipolar confrontation and act forcefully to build a multipolar world in a multilateral framework, in which every country or group of countries can choose its own path towards prosperity and work hand in hand while abiding by rules we've agreed to, all of us. We must resist to the pressure to pit one group of countries against another, to choose sides, because bipolar confrontation is not a good solution. Third, I deeply believe in regional organizations and what they can bring to the United Nations. Over the last 5 years, the EU has built partnerships with the African Union, Latin American countries, Caribbean countries in CELAC. ASEAN, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Central Asian countries. These cooperation networks help to weave the fabric of stabilization and achieve progress. Our EU must become stronger and more autonomous so as to bolster its capacity to work together with other organizations in the name of peace, freedom, and solidarity. You'll be hearing the EU's voice on the world stage, loud and independent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 2 world wars, the Holocaust, absolute humiliation for humanity. The European continent bears the scars of its past, and therefore we have a special responsibility to defend freedom, solidarity, and universal human dignity. The European project is geared towards reconciliation, cooperation, and increasingly friendship and fraternity. The European project should be a source of inspiration, of hope and optimism. Optimism is a duty, in fact. We can, once again, change the course of history, provided that we band together. The future has not been written. It is not a given. We can achieve greater peace, greater freedom, greater solidarity. Peace requires a lot of effort. We know that. We've given those efforts. And peace is very fragile. It breaks down sometimes, but we can piece it together even though it's difficult. Peace is wonderful. It's luminous. It carries in it hope, as does the blue peace window crafted by Marc Chagall. Let's work tirelessly to build peace. You can count on the European Union. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the European Council of the European Union,